Following on from December's video, I'm going to be joined again today by Dr. David Scott to give you a little update on the plans for Chapter 7 of our forthcoming book, Rise Up. As with the first instalment, there are enormous amounts of archival evidence and genealogical findings and background research which has been accumulated over the last 4 years, which needs to be woven into this section of the book. To give you an idea of where we're going, the initial rough draft at this stage is already 11,500 words in length, and it's still not finished yet. So we are not even going to attempt to summarise that today, it would take far too long. Instead, we're going to echo what was in the previous video and give a bit of background information and a taster of some of the witness testimonies that are helping to shape this section of the book. As an introduction, this short film provides a summary of Chapter 7 of Rise Up, which is now going to be Rise Up Book 1, which will be entitled Red Letter Days. So in this video, we're going to cover two key points from that chapter. First, that the events were an organised anti-starvation protest, which should be referred to as a rising on the grounds that it meets every requirement of the definition that will be outlined in Chapter 1. Secondly, we're going to provide an overview of the rising using the original archival research and sharing the testimonies of witnesses as given in their own words, whilst also recognising that available historical evidence is not comprehensive, it never can be. And of course some accounts may be biased, they may have come from people who were employed by mill owners, often they did, or they might have been employed by other authority figures. Because of the depth of the research, we are going to restrict our discussion in this video just to day one of the rising, concentrating notably on the evidence of one authority figure, a Blackburn constable. You can find out more about the other 3 days of the Lancashire Rising and the witness testimonies in Rise Up Book 1, which will be published later on in 2026. The governing authorities appear not to have expected the Lancashire Rising. A failure to anticipate protest, which may have created a heightened sense of anxiety over the perceived threat. After all, the fear of revolution was already very high in the Regency period. State violence sends a symbolic message to the populace, so the killings may have been the side effect of a desire to repress the uprising before the leaders were able to organise the rebellion for a more substantial duration, or even extend its geographical scope further across the country. Contemporary newspaper reports indicate that the earliest hints of discord in Pennine, Lancashire were apparent as early as February 1826. Agitators from an anonymous village in the neighbourhood of Blackburn, to quote the newspapers, moved around the district, persuading the impoverished weavers that not only were the power looms a considerable threat to their collective long-term well-being, but that the government, the magistrates, and all persons except the proprietors of the loom would be exceedingly glad to see them destroyed, and that the military would offer no resistance, provided the people confined their operations to the destruction of those machines. Far from being limited to one part of East Lancashire, textile operatives organised, attending meetings in various places across the region that spring. For example, On the 27th of February 1826, almost exactly 200 years ago, a numerous meeting of the suffering body of men took place in Nelson Square in Bolton for the purpose of making known to the public and the country at large some portion of the miserable privations which they are fated to endure. And a resolution was come to of laying before His Majesty's ministers a full account of the present dreadful condition of the weavers. As March ended and April began, Ralph Fletcher had reports from his spy, Alpha, that several weavers' meetings had been held for the specific purpose of forming an organised plan to destroy the county's power looms and cotton yarn. Within a few weeks, the uprising would follow that suggested plan of attack, although the weavers' difficulties would not be quickly overcome. Francis Place held the opinion that agents provocateurs of the government helped to incite a sense of discord, a view that was certainly supported by David Whitehead, the co-owner of Hire Mill in Rawtenstall, who recalled that this spring they sent out their emissaries to get the ignorant part of the community to believe that power looms were the cause of all their distress. Sunday meetings were held on top of these hills to discuss these matters and to persuade these ignorant people to break all the power looms. Months later, at the Lancashire Assizes, John Scott gave evidence that a week or two before the attacks began, a signal had been hoisted up on the hills at Darwin. Bell ringing offered an alternative means of communication. The bell at a Methodist church was sounded to gather the mob. And this sound would be heard again when the protesters reached Robert Munn's factory at Bacup. Wheeler's Manchester Chronicle, which reported on the event, commented that following the destruction of 52 power looms at Munn's factory, several protesters ascended to the roof of the building, rang the bell, and the mob gave 3 cheers. The nature and extent of the weavers' distress has been discussed in previous chapters. In 1826, the people of Pennine, Lancashire, faced starvation, and it is not difficult to realise that with their lives already in danger, they were relatively unconcerned about any potentially lethal state response to their protest. Alongside all of this, those in political or economic power demonstrated an almost complete failure to take the voices of the working classes seriously. Pennine and South Lancashire had limited political representation, which removed an important means of conveying dissent and dissatisfaction, aside of which the working class weavers would not have had the franchise anyway, not for almost another 40 years. So in a time of perceived existential threats to their lives and livelihoods, the model and morality of laissez-faire, leaving the market to its own devices, demonstrated a clear disconnection with the needs of the weavers. Now we come to the testimonies from day one of the rising. These are from the constables and the watchmen. Monday the 24th of April 1826 heralded the first day of the protests. Over 1,000 people gathered at Winnie Hill on the northern outskirts of Accrington, where local captains, as they were known, gave motivating speeches as they prepared to lead what would become a 4-day rising. From there, the crowd moved towards their targets. First, the power looms at the mills of Messrs Thomas and Robert Sykes, 2 brothers from Accrington, and then those at Rough Hay and White Ash in Oswaldtwistle were destroyed before the crowd moved on to Jubilee Mill and Grimshaw in Blackburn. Eyewitnesses witness testimonies were supplied by a variety of observers. So we focus here exclusively on two authority figures who were involved in policing these anti-starvation protests. Bain's History Directory and Gazetteer of Blackburn from 1825, so very pertinent, gave the address of John Kay, the constable of Blackburn, as 1 Darwin Street. Darwin Street still exists today. His statement suggests that his residence was unchanged a year later.
On Monday last, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I was standing at the door of my house in Darwin Street, Blackburn, when I observed a great number of people coming up in the direction of Salford through the marketplace. The first party consisted of around 40 to 50 persons. They were armed. 3 of them carried large iron weights on a pole. The pikemen came next. I cannot tell how many pikes there might have been, but there were upwards of 50. They were followed by a great number of persons, all of whom, except the women, appeared to be armed, and armed with pikes and hammers. They were walking as fast as they could in one compact body. I remained at my own door until I thought they had all passed. I should think several thousand of them had passed, but I cannot be accurate with the numbers.
Kay, as we can see, is very clear to claim that the protesters were a threat. And from his vantage point, he was in just the right place to be able to determine where they went next.
I saw the leaders of the mob turning out of Darwin Street and onto Jubilee Street, where the factory of Messrs Bannister, Eccles and Co is situated. I then followed the mob, and when I got to the yard of the factory, I saw a great number of persons in the lowest room of the building and in the room above in the act of breaking the power looms machinery. A large part of the mob were in the yard shouting and encouraging others to break the machinery.
We note here how the use of the word mob is very prevalent. Kay's official capacity may well have compelled him to follow the mass of people in the direction of the Eccles factory.
A great number of the persons who were armed remained in the yard, guarding the door of the factory which contained the power looms. As soon as I got into the yard, an alarm was given that the soldiers were coming, and the people in the yard began to make their escape. The first man I met was attempting to go away, and I seized his pike and took it from him. I took another pike from the next man, who was also coming out of the yard. He demanded his pike back from me, but I refused to give it to him.
So Kay's evidence makes it clear that even with military assistance, repelling and dispersing the protesters was no easy task.
At about that time, a party of dragoons consisting of around 16 men under the command of Mr. Morris came to the gate of the factory yard. They drove the crowd away from the gate, and then about half of a dozen of the soldiers came into the yard on horseback. I then seized, with the assistance of the soldiers, up to around 30 of the pikes. All of the people who were in the yard were suffered to escape because we had not sufficient force to detain them or to secure a place to put them in. The greatest number of those inside the factory made their escape through the back end window, which they broke for that purpose. 15 of the mob got into a dark room at the further end of the yard. I believe they had attempted to conceal themselves. I afterwards searched the persons who were in it, but I found no arms upon them, and I did not detain them. I found a pike, though, in the room that they were in.
Amongst those who gained entry to the factory was James Chambers. So far from being a reckless young man, the 55-year-old grandfather from Oswaldtwistle would later become the oldest man to be prosecuted after the 1826 rising. James Chambers later died in custody on the Dolphin hulk ship in the Thames in London in early 1827. John Kay recognised James Chambers as an active participant in the attack on the Eccles factory.
I have known the prisoner, James Chambers, for upwards of 20 years. I saw him on Monday the 24th of April last. He was standing at the gate of Messrs Eccles factory in Blackburn. This was at the same time that the rioters were in the building breaking the looms. He was the first man I saw on entering the factory yard. He held in his hand a hammer which I've now produced, which he kept waving over his head. I heard him call out to the people who were then breaking the looms in the factory. "Go on, my lads, down with them, break away, never mind the soldiers, you'll be paid for your trouble." I asked the prisoner how he could for shame be there, as I had got him work only a few months earlier. And the prisoner replied, "Must we be clammed or starved to death?" I then left the prisoner, and I did not see him again until Mr. Robinson had taken the hammer from him in Mr. Eccles' yard.
At Grimshaw Park in Blackburn, Edward Murray, another constable and watchman, reached John Horton's factory a quarter of an hour before the protesters, and there he witnessed a soldier's armed response to a loom breaker.
I went to the north side of the factory and put my head through one of the windows on the inside. I saw a great many people breaking the looms inside the factory, and amongst them I saw a man who was about 2 yards from me and had his back towards a very active set of people engaging in loom breaking. One of the soldiers fired his carbine, and the man above alluded to fell, and I did not see the man's face as he had his back to me at that time. I went into the factory about 10 minutes afterwards, and the man who had been shot had been carried out, but I saw a great quantity of blood on the floor near where he had stood. Only one man fell when the soldiers fired.
This short video, I hope, has just given you a small insight into just some of the testimonies that were collected about the uprising. First, we've highlighted evidence which indicates that the anti-starvation protesters were well organised, and indeed that the whole event should be referred to as an uprising. Second, we've given some accounts by police constables and watchmen with regard to what happened in Blackburn on 24th of April 1826. This is clearly not comprehensive. There is mention of one man falling under gunfire, and there were claims in the newspapers that at least 3 people were shot dead by soldiers near Jubilee Street in Blackburn. but so far it has proved impossible to verify if anybody actually died, or if instead several people were simply severely wounded. But what is certain is that people at the time did believe that 3 people had been killed in Blackburn on that day. So first-hand accounts, like the ones we've mentioned here, provide a powerful way to bring the events of some of those red letter April days back into the public memory some 200 years later. And you will be able to read more testimonies of the people involved in the anti-starvation protests and those who used the law to repress them across the 4 days of the protest in Rise Up Book 1.